Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the CNBC Africa Special. We are coming to you live from Johannesburg, where we are at the Metropolis annual meeting launch. Now, the Metropolis of the World Associations is the largest organization of major cities, provinces, and regions across the globe. And every year, members meet in one city under a common agenda that is aimed at improving the state of our cities. This year, the annual meetings will be taking place will be hosted rather by the city of Gauteng, with Gauteng Premier David Makhura as the co-chair of the Metropolis. The theme for this year's annual meeting is inclusive metropolis or inclusive metropolitan cities and city regions. This morning here in Johannesburg, where we are coming to you live from Nasrec, we will be hearing from various speakers who will be giving us more details about the upcoming meeting that will be taking place here in Johannesburg in August from the 26th to the 29th. Without further ado, I would like to call upon our first speaker right now to give the opening address. That is Mr. Mpho Nawe, who is head of the Office of the Metropolis Co-President. Thank you so much, sir. Please kindly come through.
Thank you very much, Program Director, the Premier, the Deputy Minister, the President of SALGA, and colleagues, executive members of the provincial government, executive mayors who are here. I do not have much to say. Suffice to indicate that last year in July, the Premier of the province, Premier David Makhura, was elected to be part of the co-presidency of Metropolis in Canada. As said, that the Metropolis is a body that represents megacities of the world that are meant to advance the global conventions and global agendas. So the Premier has a mandate to reduce the heaviness of national governments, sovereign governments, to ensure that some of the issues that South Africa are part of the signatory, we're able to lead and push them to be implemented at the local government, but also the sub-regional government. As indicated, you would know that over years, sovereign states has had the responsibility to represent states in the United Nations multilateral organizations. But over years, that power has reduced to go to local government, to sub-regional government. So since then, there has been a cascading down of power to those who are supposed to lead, and making that sure that whether you talk about Paris Declaration, climate change, it's not only a brief of the national government, but it's equally a brief of sub-regional and local government. The implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are also brought down to the local level. So part of this program that the Premier is leading in relation to Metropolis responsibility is to ensure that Gauteng is properly placed to lead and ensure that the international conventions are set, are part of the mainstream processes of the local government, the sub-regional government. So the Premier assumes this responsibility to ensure that there's work done. So it's not an issue that stands at international platforms or national platforms, or an issue of ministers only, but it's an issue that governments have a close relationship with what can be done at the local and provincial level. So it's a huge responsibility that the Premier has to ensure that we operationalize the functionality of the SDGs. And the three important global agendas, the SDGs, as said, localization, the implementation of the Paris Declaration, climate change, but equally the new urban agenda, which is broadly a human settlement responsibility to see to it that things are done at a local level. So we stand to say this responsibility has made, the PRIMA has also started to engage with mega cities of Africa. So the infusing of making sure that African cities assumes responsibility to be part of changing. So if you would want to see what the PRIMA does, you can always locate this responsibility between the Africa agenda, the 2063 Africa agenda, which ensures that we want the Africa we want. It is properly defined. It's not only an issue of sovereign state. And I do think that we have this opportunity to mainstream it not only with South Africans in Gauteng, but also with municipalities that are part of this process, but also provincial government is part of this process. So we urge that as the Premier is going to host the World in August, that the provincial government is not left behind. So it's not a premier issue. It's all of us part of this work to ensure that we make this work better. But again, because we've also invited executive mayors, the mayors must also be part of ensuring that we in the IDP processes, we see through this implementation of the global agenda. So it's a mobilization of work to be done and making sure that we make global conventions, global agreements a reality in our time. And for those who would care to know that the SDGs are predominantly progressive document. It is South Africa has played an important role to see to it that in 2015 there was a global approval of the SDGs, and I think the Premier would know that he will also be this year, pending on other issues, that he rise to the UN Assembly in July. A platform is created because Gauteng has become one sub-regional government that has taken interest. We will be appearing in the first global magazine, or bulletin actually, of the UN by virtue that we're able to mobilize the CDWs to be part of the UN program. Through the same responsibility, we have now created a social cluster. MEC Nandi Mayatola would be leading that project on our behalf. We are launching next week Friday on how we can collect the social goals and put them together that will drive them even at the local level. The Sustainable of the Cities, the Premier took a platform last week to address the mayors of Africa on the same issue. So the drive towards the Metropolis in July is on course. And we are certain that if all we participate in making sure that in real terms, this implementation of the SDGs, the implementation of climate change agreement, and the new urban agenda, we pull them together. So this, precisely this launch is all about telling all of us that we are part of the program. People of Gauteng, we would wish one day that a part of the syllabi of the schools, primary schools, people talk about how to keep Gauteng green. We want to see that poverty is fought at the local level. So it's not a government responsibility necessarily that all of us are part of this process to unlock what we're supposed to do as South Africa. So we are very happy how the Premier has taken interest and pushed the boundaries. We have said Africans are coming on board on implementation. So it's no longer about nation states and the power of the nation state or sovereign state. It's also about how a sub-regional stroke local government take responsibility to do work. So, Program Director, I think the rest, the President of UCLG is part of this, and the Premier is part of the Minister, the Deputy. So they will say more on what needs to be done. Let me not spoil the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And of course, we are looking forward to hearing from the various other speakers about exactly what more needs to be done, because I do agree with you in terms of addressing the challenges that the country is facing, that of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, that it needs to be a bottom-up approach, and the cities need to lead the way, and national government will jump on board when they are ready to jump on board. A young reminder to everyone that the hashtag for this event is hashtag MAM2018. So we would love to hear from you on Twitter and other social media platforms. Please, when you do send your tweets out as you are watching this broadcast at home, please include the handle at Gauteng Province. So that's at Gauteng Province, or you can use the handle at Metropolis_org. One last reminder that the hashtag is hashtag MAM. I'd like to call upon our next speaker now, who will take us through the subject of building global cooperation for the local and the regional government, because it's definitely a teamwork drive. Councillor Parkstow, who's president of SALGA and the UCLG, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much to our program director, co-president of Metropolis and Premier of Gauteng, Mr. David Makura, Deputy Minister Andries Nel, Deputy Minister of Cocta, MECs present and executive mayors, distinguished guests, members of the media fraternity, ladies and gentlemen. May I first express my delight at being part of this media launch of the upcoming Metropolis annual meeting to be hosted in the Gauteng province in August 2018. Without a doubt, this forthcoming meeting is an auspicious occasion that will enable us to share best practice and experiences on enabling and engendering inclusive metropolitan cities and city regions. Today's media launch, as well as the annual Metropolis meeting, come at a time when humanity and its metropolitan networks face daunting challenges of super-urbanization, inter- and intra-migration patterns, and huge infrastructure backlogs, amongst others. Thus, in order to adequately respond to these interlinked challenges, we need to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the engagement of metropolitan cities and subnational governments and regions in the discourse around the future of our world, our cities, and humanity as a whole. We also need to advance suitable urban development policies and frameworks. And thus, speaking as a representative of SALGA, the voice of South Africa's local government is critical as a conduit that is able to respond to key pressure points in our cities. Meanwhile, as a representative of the global network of cities and regions, the UCLG, we are called upon to place appropriate measures to bridge the gap between cities and in the global north and cities in the global south. To do this equitably and sustainably, it requires that we collectively find, for instance, innovative financing instruments, and that we channel opposite infrastructure models to spur economic growth. This is another reason I'm encouraged that part of the mission of the Metropolitan Annual Meeting focuses not only on alignment and integration across spheres, but also on spurring economic growth into employment growth. Ladies and gentlemen, why is it important to emphasize the building of global cooperation for local and regional governments? Firstly, our generation is tasked with the practical implementation at both local and regional levels of the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals. Both local and regional governments are critical players in realizing the SDGs, and they are important instruments in bringing about inclusive development and sustainable economies. As you know, by inclusive and sustainable economies, we are referring to goal number 8 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which talk to promoting, among other factors, equality and opportunity, and the participation of growth by all. Secondly, building global cooperation for local and regional government is crucial, since our experience so far working at both SALGA and the UCLG has taught us that in our interconnected world economy, growth of cities does not necessarily translate into bringing inequalities and regional inequities. Instead, what is needed is a new paradigm of thinking that highlights inclusive urbanism, taking into cognizance the direction of our globalized world in the fourth industrial revolution. In any situation whereby urbanism results in more than 50% of the world's population living in cities, we are therefore required to identify existing and nascent opportunities in the urban dividend. Inclusive urbanism demands that the responsibilities in inclusive and circular economies are shared between and among cities and towns. Inclusive urbanism is about taking collective responsibility for our shared future in guaranteeing the new urban agenda outcomes that include universal access to quality basic services, creating economic opportunities, promoting adequate housing, planning better for growing infrastructure demands, and development of appropriate transport networks. Thirdly, as we have learned in South Africa, the strengthening of local government with adequate resources and capacities is necessary for the sector to achieve accountable and efficient service delivery and governance. As we fondly say at the UCLG, localization of the SDGs and the new urban agenda is not about merely transferring global goals and commitments into local and regional spheres. Rather, it is about seeking to address the transcendent global challenges through and by means of available local solutions. Moreover, localization of SDGs and the new urban agenda is about encouraging and promoting peer-to-peer co-learning strategies. And fourthly, as the UCLG and SALGA, we support initiatives such as those that are enabled by the forthcoming Metropolitan Annual Meeting. This is mainly because we need to leverage on our collective potential to overcome spatially determined underdevelopment, particularly in the Global South. As such, solidarity and support of local and regional governments is indispensable if we in South Africa in particular are to implement the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is a rallying call for cities to, amongst others, drive shared economic growth, shared employment growth, instill social cohesion, engender an active citizenry, and active communities geared towards common goals. These factors explain our rationality in capacitating local and regional governments to leverage innovative financial instruments and, in addition, work towards pooled financing mechanisms. In conclusion, as we prepare for the UN High-Level Panel Forum to be convened next month to assess how far we have come to realize the implementation of the SDGs, today's media launch is of essence to promote collaborative projects and learning programs amongst the major cities of the world. The annual meeting further provides a platform for us to open paths to open paths for effective cooperation through networks that promote gender mainstreaming and youth empowerment in urban management. Thank you very much.
We are very much aware that many cities all over the world are facing quite a number of challenges, and these do include rapid urbanization, as Councillor Tau did highlight. It makes it difficult for cities to obviously deliver on things that they need to, like service delivery such as housing, education, and healthcare for its people. And Councillor Tau also highlighted the infrastructure backlog that many cities around the world are facing, and this obviously making it difficult for businesses to operate and making it difficult for, those investments to come in and the cities to grow and really spur the kind of growth that the economy needs as a whole. So we're about to hear about a framework, an integrated urban development framework that aims to address some of the challenges that cities are facing, particularly the national urban challenges. And I would like to, at this stage, invite Mr. Andries Nel, who is the Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs.
Thank you very much, Program Director. We join Premier David Makura in welcoming Metropolis to South Africa, and in particular to the province of Gauteng. This important Metropolis annual meeting will take place from the 26th to the 29th of August at the Sandton Convention Centre. It's significant that this important meeting will be taking place very soon after we as a country would have celebrated the centenary of our first president, President Nelson Mandela, and shortly before we would be celebrating the centenary of a stalwart of our struggle, May Albertina Sisulu. President Nelson Mandela was born on the 18th of July, 1818, and every year people across the globe celebrate this day by performing 67 minutes of community service in memory of the 67 years that Nelson Mandela sacrificed, struggling against injustice and oppression. When he received the freedom of the city of Cape Town on the 27th of November, 1997, President Mandela said the following, and I quote, "We need such creativity to develop the city's economy, to create jobs and resources for reconstruction and development. To succeed in this, we must harness all the energies and resources of our people. Your determination to build a partnership for development between government and the private sector is encouraging. So too are the plans to integrate your booming informal business sector into the city's mainstream economy. Not only will this boost growth, but it will create real openings for those who were previously excluded from the world of business. Like all our cities, and in some ways even more than others, Cape Town bears the scars of our past in its still largely separated residential areas and the great disparity in the conditions and opportunities they offer." Close quote. And indeed, South Africa's history and present has forced us to be at the forefront of the international urban agenda for the sake of our own future. We cannot allow the grip of our past on our present to strangle and hold back our future. The theme of this year's Metropolis meeting, inclusive metropolitan cities and city regions, is therefore both very relevant globally, but for us in South Africa in particular. The President of the United Cities and Local Government, the world's leading organization for cities, local government and regional governments and municipal associations throughout the world, is then none other than our very own Councillor Parks Tau. Premier David Makura is now the co-president of Metropolis, the World Association of the major metropoli the largest association of governments of major cities over the world. One of the defining features of the 21st century is the fact that it is an urban century, that the world is urbanizing extremely, extremely rapidly. In 1950, 1/3 of the world's population lived in urban areas. We have now passed the urban tipping point, where 54% of the world's population lives in urban areas. And by 2050, that is projected to reach over 60%. And those trends apply to the rest of our continent. They apply to our country, where already 63% of South Africans live in urban areas, and by 2050, 8 out of every 10 South Africans is going to be living in an urban area. The UN Habitat 3 conference of 2016 recognized urbanization as a tool for development and set out the new urban agenda, which calls for sustainable urban development by rethinking how cities are planned, managed, and inhabited. South Africa's own National Development Plan, the NDP, sets the objective that by 2030, South Africa should observe meaningful and measurable progress in creating more functionally integrated, balanced, and vibrant urban settlements. And very importantly, that those urban settlements should be inextricably linked to our rural settlements, and that we should reinforce the linkages between urban areas and rural areas. The country's national urban policy, the Integrated Urban Development Framework, responds to and also builds on various chapters in the NDP, especially Chapter 8, that talks about transforming our national space economy. The IUDF seeks to foster a shared understanding across government and society about how best to manage urbanization and achieve the goals of economic development, job creation, improved living conditions by addressing current urban inefficiencies as identified by the NDP. The IUDF aims to guide the development of inclusive, resilient, livable urban settlements while directly addressing the unique conditions and challenges facing South Africa's cities and towns. It thus provides a framework for reorganizing the urban system so that cities and towns can become more inclusive, safe, productive, and resource efficient, thus becoming good places to work and live in. The IUDF challenges our traditional forms of urban planning and urges us to change, and change quickly. As the UN Habitat has pointed out in its analysis of how we need to implement the new urban agenda globally, cities and human settlements are being refashioned by economic and demographic growth, migration, climate risks, disruptive technologies, and social fragmentation. We have to challenge the way that we've been doing things because, and I quote from a UN Habitat publication on integrated planning called Leading Change, quote, "We'll need to do a better job managing this planet of cities over the next decades than we did during the last few. The next half century presents our last and only opportunity to get urbanization right. As we welcome hundreds of millions of people into our cities, in the coming decades, we'll need our best tools to craft them into the cities we and the planet need," close quote. To this extent, our spatial plans, our integrated development planning approaches, and our land use management systems must be sufficiently agile to respond to this reality. Failure to do this will make it impossible for us to reverse the stubborn apartheid spatial planning legacy and leave our communities in desperate conditions. Responsive, differentiated, and spatially informed integrated planning is essential if we wish to spatially transform South Africa. The effective implementation of the IUDF is thus dependent on all our partners mainstreaming the discipline of integrated planning across spheres and sectors and promoting sustainable land use in the interests of appropriate development that meets the needs of the people. We are making progress, but much, much more needs to be done, and importantly, it must be done much faster than we are doing it at the moment. In February of 2018, we presented a progress report on implementation of the IUDF to a joint meeting of all cabinet committees. Whilst the report was well received, President Cyril Ramaphosa challenged us to be bolder and more ambitious and much more deliberate in how we manage intergovernmental, multi-sectoral cooperation for managing urbanization. In particular, we were directed to return to Cabinet with an action plan and institutional arrangements. President Ramaphosa has urged us to move away from developing an integrated urban development framework to leading an integrated urban development revolution, in his own words. This is a collective responsibility that involves each and every one of us. Our IUDF implementation plan is being updated and sharpened to give effect to the President's call for a bolder, more integrated implementation based on a firmer institutional foundation. This will be aligned to the new urban agenda adopted at UN Habitat 3 in 2016 by over 150 countries. Here we must thank the Department of Human Settlements for their outstanding leadership of the new urban agenda development process and for their continuing close relationship and collaboration with COGTA on this critical issue. In short, the IUDF implementation plan adopts an all-of-government and all-of-society implementation approach that we are working consistently to bring into force. We're deepening our partnerships with many technical cooperation partners, private enterprises, and academic institutions, and trust that closer engagement with communities will also assist us all to better understand what makes a space livable and safe for all South Africans. Momentum is building across the country. SALGA continues to be active partners, managing a significant program built on deepening support along the rural-urban interface through the Small Town Regeneration Program, which focuses on 65 smaller urban spaces to regenerate, restore, and strengthen small town economies. This recognizes the role of small towns, which play an important role in anchoring rural economies. We need to emphasize that when we talk about urbanization in a South African context, we are not just talking about metropolitan areas. We are talking about those small towns. We are talking about those intermediate cities that constitute some of the fastest growing and dynamic parts of our economy. And that for that reason, COGTA continues to work and partner with National Treasury on the successful City Support Program, which provides targeted support to the 8 metros to build the capabilities and linkages for cities to really lead the development of more inclusive, productive, and sustainable environments. The support program follows an outcomes-based and results-focused approach underpinned by the development of the built environment performance plans, which are key in helping cities to drive an urban program that delivers specific spatial objectives. We have also developed and are implementing the Intermediate City Municipality Program, which is a support initiative for over the medium term, 39 identified intermediary municipalities. The ICM program is supported by the World Bank and SICO, the Swiss Government Development Agency. The ICM support program focuses on 4 areas, which include improving integrated development plans and spatial development frameworks, linking sound spatial development frameworks and longer-term development plans to the 10-year capital expenditure frameworks, putting in place a grant framework such as the Integrated Urban Development Grant, which incentivizes integrated and compact development, sustaining investments in the right places over time, and an outcome-focused monitoring that tracks the impact of these programs. 2 municipalities were identified as intermediary city pilot projects, Polokwane and Umhlatuze, with whom the IUDF team have developed very positive relationships, both at city and provincial levels. And in fact, from this very exciting media launch, I will be proceeding to an equally exciting engagement with Umhlatuze over the next 2 days to see how they are using the IUDF to foster a better form of integrated urban development in that city. Diagnostic assessments have been completed in both pilots, focusing on spatial planning, infrastructure asset management, etc. The IUDF Political Steering Committee that is chaired by COGTA and comprises deputy ministers from many sector departments continues to provide political oversight over this process, and we thank them for their participation. We believe that South Africa needs to think differently about how we plan and build sustainable cities and towns, small towns and villages. We have seen that an agenda for making local government an environment of hope and opportunity for all residents will need to cover many issues, including infrastructure, housing, transport, finance, governance, and regulation. We need to redouble our efforts collectively to implement the back to basics approach to enable all of our municipalities to be in a position to manage urbanization in ways that deliver a better life to all of our citizens. The IUDF clearly states that as a principle for how we manage our sustainable development opportunities, we must more strongly commit to an all of society, all of government approach. Let us therefore prioritize the importance of partnerships for capable, sustainable, and developmental local government. Let us work with communities, with civil society, with every organ of state, and with the private sector to make sustainable local government an experienced reality for all South Africans. The urbanization challenges that South Africa faces are not dissimilar to those of many African cities across the continent. We're very happy then that African metropoles will meet prior to the Metropolis annual meeting in August to find common ground and agree on joint approaches. It is vital that African voices be heard in the conversations on urbanization. After all, we have the most to gain or to lose should we fail to take advantage of the opportunities that gatherings such as the Metropolis meeting provides. Certainly, if we are to collectively achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 11, to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, it is crucial that we work together. We thank you.
Well, let's hear now a lot more from Gauteng as the host of the Metropolis annual meeting for 2018. Here to tell us more about that is the Gauteng Premier himself, Mr. David Makhura.
Thank you very much, Fifi, our program director. The Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in our country, Honorable Andries Snell, the President of SALGA and the United Cities and Local Government, Councillor Pakstau, the MECs who have been able to join us here, and the executive mayors of our cities, senior government officials. I also saw the Executive Director of the Gauteng City Region Observatory, Professor Rob Moore, and the CEO of the South African Cities Network, Mr. Stolembanga, was also here earlier on. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. This morning, I want to welcome you first as the co-president of the Metropolis, and secondly, as the Premier of Gauteng. I welcome you to this media launch in preparation for a very important annual meeting of the Metropolis, which will take place in our province, in our country, in our continent of Africa. So, Jambo Africa, Dumelang, Sanbonan, good morning, bonjour. It is a great honor that we as a province will host more than 130 governors and mayors from across the world's major metropolitan regions and cities of the world. As explained earlier on by the Secretary General, Octavia, this will be the second time that our country, our province, our continent would have been a host to this important meeting. The first time this meeting was hosted by Councillor Tau when he was the mayor of Johannesburg. It is also important to understand that the Metropolis board meeting will take place immediately after the BRICS summit, another very important platform for dialogue, especially on economic development in today's world global economy, which would have been hosted by our country. So there's a direct relationship between that BRICS summit, which is an important platform for specific economies that are grappling with the challenges of inequality, the challenges of inclusive growth, but also those economies are themselves grappling with the challenges of rapid technological change, climate change, and urbanization. If there are three dominant mega trends that characterize today's world, those three dominant trends would include rapid urbanization, rapid technological change, and climate change. So the Metropolis annual board meeting that will take place in our province will, in different ways, if you look at the agenda of that meeting, grapple with these three dominant mega trends. And for us in Africa, the fundamental question is that Africa cannot be left behind. That's the fundamental question that face African cities and African metropolitan regions. So as we prepare for that August meeting, we also take to that meeting an African agenda. And last week I had an opportunity to address the mayors of African capital cities, at which meeting, that is the Sustainability Forum, hosted by the city of Tshwane. Again, another important meeting that our province hosted. The critical issues there is Africa's place in this urbanizing world. Deputy Minister Andries Nel and the President of the UCLG made this point. We live in a world and in a time dominated by cities. So the reality that cities and city regions, and in particular major metropolitan regions in the world, are the dominant players in the global economy, contributing up to 80% of the global economy, is something that African cities have to grapple with. Again, if Africa is not to be left behind, we in the south of Africa, the most urbanized, the most industrialized part of our continent, must be in the lead. So it's not an accident that we are hosting the Metropolis annual meeting for the second time in 5 years as South Africa. Of course, we do so on behalf of our continent. The Metropolis annual meeting will be followed by another important landmark gathering in our continent, again to be hosted by this province, and again in the city of Johannesburg. That is the Africa Investment Forum, which will be hosted by our province in partnership with the African Development Bank. So the critical issues that the Africa Investment Forum will look at are the issues of investment, particularly in infrastructure. Now we know there is a direct relationship between cities and infrastructure. So if there's something that attracts people, as it happens all the time, and it is happening increasingly more in this century of cities, the 21st century, it is infrastructure. Is the quality of infrastructure or just the potential of the cities to offer better infrastructure? That's what attracts people to cities. Because together with better infrastructure or the potential to offer better infrastructure comes the quality of life or the potential to offer better quality of life. And we in Africa would always talk about the potential because the character of African cities, as we know, African cities are have high inadequacies of infrastructure. They are highly informalized, but they still attract larger numbers of people, especially the youth, because together with that infrastructure potential, cities are also a cluster of a number of things. They are a cluster of infrastructure, but they are also a cluster of firms or businesses that offer opportunities. They are also a cluster of particular type of innovations and skills. So even the most informalized African city offers better prospects for a quality of life. And that's why we in Africa cannot be left behind. So, President of the UCLG, Councillor Pakstow, and Deputy Minister Nel, so we will use this opportunity to host the Metropolis annual meeting to assert once more that Africa cannot be left behind. Africa cannot be left behind on the fundamental question of the fourth industrial revolution. And Africa cannot be left behind on the fundamental question of dealing with the challenges of climate change. And Africa cannot be left behind in grappling with the challenges of rapid urbanization and migration. So increasingly, as African cities, we must offer better prospects, better quality of life, but we must also offer better governance. As the Gauteng city region, and I think Octavia puts it very, very well, that we are a metropolitan region of metropolitan cities, and that's what we call the city region in very brief. We are ready to host this annual meeting of the Metropolis. I said to you, I also speak as the co-president of the Metropolis. We have major challenges across the world, and we have major challenges across our continent. Some of those challenges is that the people who move to cities everywhere in the world are better educated people, are more creative and innovative people, are more entrepreneurial people, are more ambitious people, are more youthful people, and are more impatient people. And this has implications. So cities have to be governed well. But we who are the governors of our city regions or metropolitan regions and cities must also understand that we attract the kind of people to our cities who are impatient. So when you wake up one morning, they are toy-toying. We here call that toy-toy in this part of our continent, and they want service delivery, is because they have moved from parts of the world or parts of the country where they were waiting, and they are no longer prepared to wait anymore. So the implications of being governors in cities and the city regions and these metropolitan regions is that we face many more challenges than to be a governor of a village in the periphery, a village in the periphery of our continent, or a small village in a country in Asia, the challenges are not the same. And we, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, have to come to terms with the fact that more than 430 million people in sub-Saharan Africa already live in cities. And our continent is not urbanizing at a slow pace. So it is a well-known fact that Africa's population will hit 2 billion by 2050. But even with that, 7 out of 10 Africans by that time will live in cities. So Africa is urbanizing at a pace much faster than other parts of the world, even in that sense. And most of the city dwellers by 2050, the 7 out of 10 Africans will be living in cities. Most of the city dwellers will be young people, largely below the age of 30. So we've got to prepare for this, which also means we need better infrastructure. We need better financing of our cities. We need better management of urbanization. And Deputy Minister, this cannot be done by regional or provincial or municipal leaders alone. We need better national planning around urbanization, precisely what our country has to do. So urbanization is not a problem of cities and urban regions alone. Urbanization is now a national problem. If not managed well, there will be disaster in many countries. Unplanned development, increase in inequalities, increase in levels of urban poverty. As more and more people move to cities that are not ready to receive them, that are not adequately equipped to house people, to offer them the urban promise, which is what drives people to cities. And if cities cannot offer people the urban promise, there will be disaster in these cities. Greater social instability, higher levels of crime will be the character of our cities, at the back of large inequalities and high levels of urban poverty. So what are we taking as Gauteng to this annual meeting? We are taking to this annual meeting our own experiences, but we're also bringing Africa along to this annual meeting. So our province is ready to host the annual meeting of the Metropolis. We are ready, but the challenges are huge, and we should insist that this annual meeting in Africa should put at the center of the decisions and the conclusions of the 2018 Metropolis annual meeting, the urban agenda and the African agenda in this sense. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us here today. That brings us to the end of our formal proceeding here. Of course, just one last reminder for those of you who did not get it, that annual meeting of the Metropolis will be taking place here in Gauteng in August from the 26th to the 29th. And there are further details about when the exclusive meetings for African cities will be taking place prior that to ensure that African cities are really on one page in terms of addressing their challenges before meeting the world stage. 130 mayors from all around the world are expected to convene in Sandton in Johannesburg later this year. But from us here at Nasrec in Johannesburg, this brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much for watching, and we wish you a swell day ahead. Bye.